I'm gonna sort, so I'm just gonna ignore like the scope variants. I'm just gonna treat them all as one weapon. Obviously, Grizzco weapons are not a thing. I'm not rating the Rainmaker. Sorry about that. I'm sure y'all wanted my opinion on where the Rainmaker would fall on a multiplayer tier list, but not today. Okay, I think that's all the Grizzco weapons out of the way. All right. So, things that I have been seeing lately. So Splattershot is still one of the here. You know what? I'm gonna do this because I think that the gap between Sloshing Machine and some of the other top weapons is not that big, and I think these other weapons are somewhat meta-defining. So I'm actually gonna be doing this and putting these up here. I'm even going to put that up there now, based on what I've been seeing lately. And then we'll talk about these in just a second. I just want to get some placements out of the way. Is there anything else that I feel like is on these weapons levels? I'm just going through them one by one really quick, making sure that I have everything formulated in. Oh, yes, this needs to go up there too. I think I'm going to have more of an S tier than an S, like all the way down to A. So these are, I think... Is there anything else I'm missing? I'm second guessing myself so hard. These are, I think, the best weapons in the game. Nah, I'm probably gonna save that for us. These are, I think, the best weapons in the game that like you're generally going to want to form a team comp around. The Slosher might drop down a level. Just I feel like it's a lot better than its usage has been. I guess it might be that it's just kind of considered outclassed by the machine right now. That's probably a use case for a reason to put it down there. But okay, let's get to the other weapons before we start placing any more of these. So X tier here. Top tier is not on screen. Okay, note to self. I am not allowed to scroll. We'll start with the X tier. Sloshing Machine has been known to be one of the best weapons in the game, arguably the best weapon in the game since launch. And that is largely a map design problem. I say problem because what's going to happen is you're going to end up stuck in one of these small choke points in the map, and you're going to get walled the heck out because you're going to want to move forward, and you're just not going to be able to if a machine is watching it. They'll put fizzy bombs in the way. If the fizzy bomb so much as touches you, they can start to follow up with machine shots, and you have to just run straight away very quickly to be able to escape that sort of pressure. It's a weapon that just kind of gets to walk forward at you because of the conditions that the map creates. It doesn't have to worry as much about being flanked. It doesn't have to worry about somebody getting on top of it because the only places that it can be approached from, it can be watching. They can be directly in front of it. If the maps were more wide open, if there were more flank routes, even if there was more cover, you could probably flank a machine and it would be a little bit weaker, I think. I think map design is a big reason why this weapon is as strong as it is. And I could easily see it dropping if other maps get added to the competitive map pool. But right now, probably the strongest weapon in the game. The other argument, in my opinion, is the E-Liter. I think E-Liter is probably a little bit on the lower side, but E-Liter just, it can see everything on these maps. It's so aggravating to have to play against an E-Liter on a map like Mincemeat Metalworks or a map like Mahi Mahi or Scorch Gorge, because there aren't multiple routes onto the map. And that's how you would beat an E-Liter. You would beat an E-Liter by it not being able to shut down the side of the map that you're playing on, by being able to play the opposite side from the E-Liter. But on a lot of the maps, you just can't. On Mahi Mahi, you have two tiny little squares of cover. Like, it's actually insane how little of the map on Mahi Mahi you are allowed to stand on if there is an E-Liter watching you. I'm going to go and open up Recon to, like, point this out here. Let's say that the enemy team has an E-Liter right there. Where can I stand? I can stand here, I can stand here. I can stand, like, here. If I stand anywhere else for too long while the E-liter has charge, I die. This position right here sucks, because an enemy position that counters this position is standing right here, which is one of the other places that's safe for them. So they see you coming from a mile away, you have absolutely no cover from them, so standing here is something you can only do if you are hard committing to right side push right here, and do that. So that's kind of off limits, which means you're either standing here or you're standing here, unless you have the range to also stand up here. These positions are very easy to flush out, because if you run an E-liter, it covers everything else, and then if you run a machine, they just throw a single fizzy bomb right there, and your entire team is flushed out into the E-liter's sightline, and they can be picked off from there. This map sucks, because you just can't move anywhere. It's largely a map design problem. If the maps are better, then these two weapons are not as disgusting as they are right now. These two weapons are probably pretty well balanced, actually, if we get maps more like, you know, the Reef from Splatoon 2, where you have so many different flank routes to come in from. More maps, even like Museum. Like, Museum doesn't even have a lot of cover, but at least you have a plat that you can use as a staging ground to push in from. A plat that actually looks out over the middle of the map and gives you information. So, yeah, in like nerfing these weapons, nerfing these weapons, I don't even want the weapons touched. I want maybe a little bit of like an ink consumption nerf or something for the machine if you know it's still too overpowering, but because that is a really insanely good kit for it. But more than anything, I think what needs to happen is we need new maps that fix this problem, and the old maps need to be reworked. Otherwise, like, why did they change anything about Mahi Mahi? Why did they change anything about Hammerhead Bridge? Because the stages that we have are so much worse for the game than their Splatoon 1 counterparts were in those redesigns. So, ugh. Anyway, Splattershot. So, one of the biggest reasons that you have a Splattershot is Trizooka. That's not the only big reason, but Trizooka is a big one, because one of the answers to how do you deal with an E-liter is Trizooka. It doesn't quite have E-liter range, but it is very close, and this is a weapon that's already going to be trying to, like, shark anyway, so having a weapon that's very maneuverable, that can sneak into places, that can get into a position that the E-liter isn't expecting, pop up, delete it with the Zuka, and then, like, swim away or something, or try and get more picks, or stay in and just keep pressing the advantage once your Zuka shots are fired. That's a really big deal for being able to get rid of that map control that the E-liter is able to exert. It's also obviously very good against other backline weapons. I'm just picking on the E-liter because it's the one that's so domineering right now. But this is also a fabulous answer to an Explo, which is the other top-tier anchor weapon right now, in my opinion. So that is a huge part of why you run that. Another part of why you run it, though, is just that it's a short-range shooter, and those have always been one of the best weapon classes in Splatoon. Short-range shooters are more maneuverable. They have very high DPS generally. You're not punished as hard for missing a single shot, and so even if, you know, you don't have perfect aim, you still get multiple opportunities, and generally, you know, people who play those are going to get their aim on pretty quickly. So unlike, you know, a Charger or an H3 or something, if you miss a shot with those weapons, you need to, like, run away or, like, reposition, or you might just be dead. Whereas if you miss a shot with a Splattershot, you've got another one coming out in, like, 6 frames. So it's not a big problem at all. So this weapon is really good. It also has suction bombs, so running LDE on it and using suction bomb spam is an option. This kit can play a lot like the Kensa Splattershot did in Splatoon 2 as a sort of supportive bomb spammer. You use your special and then you go in weapon, where it can flip the switch from supportive to attacking. Trizuka isn't exactly the most supportive special, quote unquote, but it's going to play sort of like a support to farm it and use that utility of being able to delete something at very long ranges on a special timer to give the team advantages that it needs to be able to move in. Very, very strong weapon. Anyone who wants to play like a frontline weapon, this is the first one that I've been recommending for that reason. But there are also some other good options. The Splash is a really interesting case. Splash was being rated very mediocre, I think, early on in the game. I think mostly because people didn't understand the power of Crab. But Crab is a really, really powerful special when it's set up in a position where it can use it safely. And as people have been using it and setting up with it and learning how to keep themselves alive in it, that firepower you get from the rapid fire shots is insane. And the paint is insane. If a Crab sets up and you don't have a flank on it, you just have to move. There aren't a lot of weapons that have a way to deal with a Crab head on. And sure, they can kind of run out of the way, but that just means that it's now displacing you, and that's still an advantage that it's gained. We just saw, in that Rainmaker match on Hagglefish, they were running double Crab, and they would put a Crab on either side so that we were running into that kind of overwhelming firepower on either side, and that worked pretty well. So I am actually bumping this up into the X tier from S+. I think that the main weapon and sub combination that it had in Splatoon 2 is just as powerful as it ever was. The Splash is a slightly shorter ranged weapon than the Splatter shots, so it's not quite as good for slaying it quickly, but it is lightweight, which makes it more maneuverable and gives it more of an opportunity to hit the shots that it needs. It has a burst bomb that it can use to poke at long range, which the Splatter shot can throw a suction bomb, but that's not going to have as immediate an impact on someone's positioning, and it's also not going to help it fish for kills on wounded enemies like the Splash will. The Splash is one of the better Ninja Squid users in the game because it's a lightweight weapon and therefore it needs less swim speed to counteract it. And in a game where Ninja Squid is really valued because of things like E-Leader and the sightline issue that we talked about earlier, I think that this weapon is actually a tier up from where I probably would have put it even a few days ago. So these are the next weapons which, like, every single one of these, I had to think long and hard about whether I wanted to put it in X. Like, all of these weapons are really, really, really good. And if you are playing them, if you are solo maining them, you are still fine. I think that these weapons are the ones that are setting the meta, and then these weapons are maybe doing more responding to it in a successful way. These weapons are powerful enough that you need to have an answer for them in tournaments, and that these are just weapons that happen to have good answers to these ones, I think is the way that I would put it. So let's talk about these ones. So I'm sure, on someone else's tier list, any of these could probably be up a level. But Junior is the best bubble farmer right now, and bubble is a very, very useful support special. In tower control and splat zones, I've seen it being called, like, the meta. On tower control, you put a bubble on the tower, and you just kind of get 20 free tower points a lot of the time. As long as you've got a successful push going on, like, the bubble is just going to add points to that push by itself. Because as soon as somebody starts shooting at the bubble, now you know where they are, and you're going to be suppressing that with things like bombs, things with, like, E-Leader shots. Like, it's really dangerous to have your position known for too long. And so with the bubbler, you have to maintain sustained fire on it. And there are a couple of answers to it. You could throw a Booyah Bomb at it, and you could Crab Tank to shred it really quickly. E-Leader probably snipes that thing pretty fast, but other than those things, like just about any other option that I can think of is going to get shut down decently hard by a big bubbler. So Junior being in position to farm those things gives it a really, really good supportive niche. One of the things that I think keeps this from being any higher is that you get a lot less utility out of the bubbler in Rainmaker and to a lesser extent Clam Blitz. I think, in zones and TC, X tier weapon. But because it doesn't have quite as much of a range there, you saw X-Ray. X-Ray plays a lot of Junior, but you saw him switching on to the Splash a lot instead while we were playing, just because that was the better supportive weapon for him to be running at that point. So that's where I'm at with Junior. 52 is, if you want a short-range shooter that's not a Splattershot that you're getting primarily for kills, it's a 52 gal. 52 is the hold forward, get kills weapon. And in that role, it is, pretty unmatched. It's still the Kensa 52 sort of kit from Splatoon 2. It's still one of the most powerful frontline weapons in the game. It is able to both slay and skirmish at the same time, like just about equally well. It's very good at doing both of those things because it has its splash wall. So it can put the splash wall up, and if you get distracted by the splash wall or something and start shooting at it, well, it can swim right up to the splash wall, and it has very long-range shots for its kill time, and it only needs to two-shot you. It's just very difficult to fight head-on. It can just kind of take space however it wants to, and move up very quickly. We saw Dude having a lot of success on this, running a bunch of move speed gear and just flanking constantly. He would just go in by himself on flank routes, arrive there before people were expecting, and get kills. I think that this is still, if you one-trick this weapon, you can play it basically anywhere. The big reason that I've dropped it down from X to S Plus is just that it doesn't get a special that is as impactful as any of these up here. Well, except for Wavebreaker. I think it's just fine compared to Wavebreaker, but Booyah Bomb, it's not Booyah Bomb, it's not Missiles, it's not Inkzuka, it's not Crab. I think those are the most important specials in the game right now, and Killer Whale is basically just a tool for it to either gather information or maybe help it with getting one more pick. And getting one more pick rather than displacing the most important player on the map like you could do with any of these other specials is a little bit more underwhelming. So whenever you pick this, you're depending on the player who picks it to use its fighting power to be able to push into the enemy team. And that's something that's, it's kind of the Tetris problem where, all right, well, what if that player's having a bad day? They're not going to get a lot of reliable picks or anything like that. You're depending on the player to mechanically execute rather than on the weapon to execute for them to an extent, like you can with the other specials. So, okay. Squeezer is your alternative Trizuka choice. I think the only other thing that has it is Clash Blaster, LOL. Yeah. Hero Shot is a low tier, by the way. Splattershot is where you want to be. It's just straight up outclasses it. Anyway, yeah, Clash Blaster. We won't be talking about the Clash Blaster for a while on this tier list. So, yeah, Squeezer is, you want to Trizuka, but you don't want it on a short-range shooter, basically. And one of the big things about the Squeezer that I don't like is that it's got a splash wall. I don't think it needs that splash wall, because the whole thing about the Squeezer is that it's able to use its range. It's able to be at a safe distance rather than having to have the wall up in front of it to keep it safe. So I think it's a lot less useful to have. It's still useful for supporting the rest of your team. It's not the worst thing it could have. It can still use it, but it could get more use, I think, out of having something like a bomb. I think it's definitely a much weaker kit than the foil Squeezer from Splatoon 2, which was pretty overpowering in some circumstances, but the main weapon is still obscenely good. The tap shots on it, for those who don't know, do significantly more damage and have significantly more range and are very accurate. So tap, 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 like as fast as you can mash on the ZR button. That will give you a 3-shot kill that's almost as fast as a Splattershot's from like twice the range. I don't think that's even that much of an exaggeration. It is very, very long range for what it can do. And even in Splatoon 2, this was actually one of the better answers to an E-liter. Like, you could sneak up on an E-liter, get close enough to it by sharking, and then just pop out of the ink from like some mid-distance away and tap it down as if you're right up next to it with a shorter ranged weapon. So definitely a very solid choice. I think the Splattershot, you know, in a vacuum where you can just pick whichever weapons you want, you probably pick the Splattershot over it. But if you have someone who plays like a long-range shooter, this is the weapon you probably want them playing. Because the others are a little bit more underwhelming right now, need better kits to be able to compete. Okay. Explo is one of the... I'm going to put this up above Flingza here. Explo is one of the darlings of Splatoon 3 here. A big rise for it from Splatoon 2. It's one of the backline weapons that doesn't need to contest the E-liter at line of sight. It can hit up over the top of cover. And there's so little cover in this game already that it's really great for flushing frontliners out from behind cover that they're trying to hide in. It's given point sensor and rain, which in Splatoon 2 would be kind of a death sentence for most weapons, because rain, it takes longer to farm because you don't get to start farming it as soon as you throw it. You need to wait for it to be complete before you can farm it again. So that made it really difficult to spam. And point sensor doesn't do any damage. And it's like, why would you want this instead of a bomb? Well, Explosher is probably the best user of point sensor in the game, because when you hit someone with that, it lets you see where they are behind cover and lets you find your shots behind that wall. It makes it so that all those ninja squidding players, they don't get to not get hit just for going into squid form, because it allows you to see them. You were seeing, you know, on the tournament stream, just how much of a problem I was having dealing with point sensors, because I was getting hit by them from the Nautilus here. I was getting hit by them from Explos. It was just really difficult for me to move anywhere because they always saw me, and there are only so many places that I can go to. So anywhere I was trying to go to, I was just getting pre-fired. On another map, like the Reef, point sensor is much weaker because point sensor can only shut down so much. And if someone gets spotted, they have room to back up. They have alternate routes to take that take them out of your sight. But on Mahi Mahi, the only way you're getting anything done is with stealth or overwhelming firepower. So, Explo, very, very good in the current state of the game. Flingza Roller. Flingza Roller is a great source of missiles. It is probably the best missiles weapon in the game. There are some people who are starting to push Goo Tuber, it seems like. After my video that I made about top players running it, Chara had a video that I haven't had a chance to see yet about how it's getting run in Area Cup, which is wild. But clearly people are seeing potential in it. And so Goo Tuber is one to watch in the near future. But for the time being, Flingza is probably the best missiles weapon in the game. It is really, really consistent at painting for them. It paints a lot. It's able to hold down an area in front of it very consistently as long as it's got a nice corridor it can work with. It's really difficult to approach it. You just kind of have to get at it from other directions. And the thing that I really like about it is that, just like with the Kenta Splattershot from Splatoon 2, once you pop your missiles, you actually have the tools to go more aggressive with it if you want to. The horizontal flick still has, you know, the fast speed that the Splat Rollers has. You can basically play it like a Splat Roller in situations where you need it to frontline, but most of the time it's going to get more for the team out of just farming for its special and getting missiles out as fast as it possibly can. So it's going to spend most of its time doing that. Still, you love a support weapon that isn't just a support weapon. You know, if all we cared about was how much you painted, everyone would be running Reef-Lux for missiles. But Reef-Lux has a much harder time fighting than the Flingza does. It's a lot less consistent and reliable. The hitboxes are tricky to line up. It's a lot more difficult to aim. The one-shot is very rare to see. So with the Flingza, it's like, I swing, I thwack, I win. Much simpler, much easier to implement. Okay. So that's these are the weapons that I would consider to be at the forefront of the meta right now. And I'm looking to see if there's anything else that I missed for like the 5th time here. But that's, I think, where I am at. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in the S tier here. Generally, and I should actually... Okay. I'm going to name these tiers. Okay. So, the top tier here is meta-defining. These are the weapons that... the meta is based on answering these, because these are so strong that everyone is going to be trying to run them, and everyone's going to need an answer to them in tournaments. And so what answers are they going to be finding? Some of the answers that are really good that they're going to find for that are going to come from here. So the next tier down is going to be like, these are weapons where if you play these, you're still fine. It's just that it's a little bit harder to build a comp around these weapons and still cover all of your bases. It's something where, like, there might be an option that in a vacuum is better, and you're picking this not because your weapon is, like, massively better than another option, just that it's what you know how to play, and it's what you individually will be better on. So this sort of tier is, like, where I would have put the Tenta Splattershot for most of Splatoon 2. The Tenta was not meta for most of that game's lifespan, but it was good enough that it was an answer that you could go to. And so I played it for the whole way through because it was just consistent. It worked. Like, you have to consider that when you're maining a weapon, you're committing a lot of resources to learning that weapon. And if you don't really specialize on that one thing, you're going to have a hard time learning as well as you could if you were one-tricking something. Yeah, I think this is the way that I'm going to do it. These are all pretty close to each other, everything that's here. Oh, I haven't put the charger anywhere, have I? Probably going to go there. Yeah, and I think at this point I'll just place everything and then go back and talk about it. Where do I want to go with this? I have seen, like, so few Dynamo players. It's really hard to make a judgment on this one in particular. I think we've got ourselves a list. So now that we've got it reoriented so you can actually see the X rank. So we've talked about these guys, and now we've just got to talk about everything else. Easy, right? Goo Tuber is the big question mark right now for me in this tier. Goo Tuber is doing a lot of things in high-level play that I was not expecting it would be doing. And I'm putting it here saying not best answers to meta because my current understanding is that you would prefer a Flingza over it. But if that ends up not being the case, this could easily move up one. I still need to watch that video of Chara's. I still need to watch Area Cup. And maybe that would change my opinion. You know, opinions are always changing. New information is always coming available. There's never a perfect time to make a tier list. But this one I could see moving up a tier if it's as strong as it seems like it's being, if it's not just hype. Slosher, literally the only bad thing about this weapon is that Sloshing Machine is slightly better than it. It's, you know, it's got a really, really good hitbox that's good for flushing people out from behind cover. This thing does too, but it's not as big a hitbox. It's got arguably one of the best specials in the game for displacement. This one, if it is better, it's got a much, much higher skill floor that you need to hit before you can make it worth anything to you, because it's so hard to aim. And it's a lot smaller. So the displacement that you're getting from it is definitely more specialized. You need to be really careful about how you're using that, more surgical. So this is a weapon that could move up higher, potentially, because there's not that much that's different between it and the Slosher, but right now, everyone's just picking Machine. Right now, it's feeling like the vibe is that this is outclassed a little bit. But by outclassed, we mean it's slightly worse than the best weapon in the entire game. It is still insanely strong. And really, like, putting it, you know, a tier higher would not be the worst thing. If the Sloshing Machine were not in the game, I would definitely put it at least a tier higher, although the meta would definitely be different and maybe things would be shifted around more, but it just seems right now like it's taking a very close second place, and as such, you're never going to run like both a Slosher and a Machine, right? You probably don't want to run two of either of those things. So you're on a team comp, you're making a decision, do I want a Slosher, do I want a Machine? You're probably going to go with the Machine. And so it's strong, but it's probably not the best answer that you've got, and that's what lands it here. Range Blaster is just a really solid kit overall. It's about as much as the Range Blaster can ask for, except for a Burst Bomb. And, you know, Wave Breaker is a really solid special for starting fights. It's a weapon that can push up close enough to actually land a Wave Breaker, as opposed to some of these other weapons that just, like, never get to put it down because they're too far away from anywhere that it would be useful to put it down. Like, look at what other weapons have this special. You've got E-Liters, you've got Heavies. Neither of those two weapons are ever going to get that much value out of a Wave Breaker because they just don't get close enough to the enemy team. Like, they're taking a huge risk putting it down in any area where you're expecting people are going to be. So the best use is, like, maybe flushing people out from behind cover or something, but, like, the Heavy is going to control most of the space that its Wave Breaker is going to control, and the E-Liter is going to control well past where the Wave Breaker is going to control. The range in the Dualie Squelchers, I feel like they can actually make much better use of that special than those weapons can, so I think that that's pretty nice for it. The big thing that I think is holding this weapon back right now is Inkvac, because I think Inkvac is one of the... It's a special that at first seemed top tier, but then we started learning how to counter it. Then we learned that, like, there's lag time between when it charges a shot and when it can fire that shot, and it can get just killed by someone in between that. Then we learned that if you're gonna, you know, stick to that plan, you might as well just shoot into the Inkvac to get to the point where it has to fire its shot faster. And also, if you Inkvac against a short-range shooter, it's just going to get behind you and shoot you in the back because you can't turn fast enough. It's very slow. It also is something that takes your main weapon out of the play for a really long time. So I don't think that Inkvac is as powerful as I thought it was on launch. I think there are definitely some major weaknesses to it, and that drops this down a lot for me. Same exact deal with the Splat Charger. The other thing about the Splat Charger, though, is that it's lower range than the E-Liter is. So the E-Liter basically beats it at its own game, which is owning a lot of the map. It's really nice that it has a bomb, but I think despite the fact that the E-Liter can't use its Wave Breaker super well, the Charger is even less... it's going to be even less useful with its Inkvac, because that has to get even closer to the enemy team, and it also takes your Charger off of the map while you're using it. The Wave Breaker, at least what the E-Liter can do is sneak in somewhere, throw it, and then hightail it out of there and get back to its happy E-Liter place and have a special out on the map. With the Charger, it needs to get up close, pop its special, and stay there while the special is out. And during all of that time, you don't have a laser on the map. So that's why E-Liter is outclassing it right now. There are definitely some maps where you don't need the extra range that the E-Liter has, in which case the Charger is something to consider. And we're seeing it being used even at top level with players like .Q favoring it a lot of the time. We've seen Ice use it. So it's definitely an alternative to consider. And realistically speaking, what's going to happen is if you are a Charger player, you're going to decide whether you want to play E-Liter or Charger depending on the map mode. So really, like, they're kind of interchangeable, and you might as well consider them one weapon in some ways, to just, like, you're thinking about which one you would prefer. But I think more of the time you're going to prefer the E-Liter, and when you have the E-Liter, it's going to have a more disproportionate impact on the map. So that's why that's where they are. This really makes it look weird on a tier list, but, like, this weapon is absolutely seeing top level play. 96 is one that I'm going to drop down a tier, actually, because that is a lot higher than I was expecting to run into it at. Dualie Squelchers. Dualie Squelchers are definitely the best dualies right now. And they're still perfectly capable of doing everything that they were capable of doing in Splatoon 2. There were definitely periods of time where the custom Dualie Squelchers were a meta weapon. There was even a short period of time where the vanilla Dualie Squelchers in Splatoon 2 were a meta weapon. They are the best kiting weapon in the game. They get you to think that you can engage on them and then back up while still shooting at you, and you can't approach them, and you just get shot as you try to run at them. Very, very powerful strategy against any weapon that it outranges, which is a lot of them. It almost has the same range as a Jet Squelcher. It's, in competition with anything that's not an anchor weapon for really, really long range. So it's a really, really powerful weapon in that regard. It doesn't have the fastest kill time, and one of the issues right now, I think, with it is that it's not got the space in a lot of maps to play its playstyle as well as it would like to. You put one of these things on Mahi Mahi, where does it dodge roll to? It's behind the one piece of cover that works. So, where else does it go? It's, doing fine, and if you're a Dualie Squelchers main, you're not going to have too many problems. Its special is Wavebreaker, which is good but not game-changing. It's not going to, define the meta the way that a Booyah Bomb or Tenta Missiles or something else will. But it's still solid, and it lets it really control the area that it already controls much, much more powerfully. Because it forces the opponents to not only try and chase it down, but also jump over stuff while they chase it down. So, great weapon, just, not the best weapon. Nautilus, this might be a little high for it, but I'm going to put it here because I think that if you're trying to run, a medalist comp, this is something that would be great to use as an anchor. I think the Rapid Pro here and the Nautilus are, if you're trying to still run anchorless, those are probably the weapons that you're using as your pseudo anchor to back the rest of the team up with. It's a much more supportive weapon, unfortunately, with its kit right now. It needs something more aggressive to really get up into this area where the main weapon belongs. Because, you give it the same kit that it had in Splatoon 2 with its Suction Bomb and Inkjet, and this is immediately up here because it's a weapon that is really, really dangerous as a Slayer and has an answer, if albeit not the best one, to Eliters with the Inkjet. So I think that we have not by any means seen the end of the Nautilus. It's just saddled with a kit that isn't the best idea for it, and it'll be much stronger in future with different kits. Inkbrush is, I think, definitely usable. It does brush things like it always has, and its kit synergizes with doing brush things as well as any kit ever has for the brush. I think this is a really well-designed kit, and it gives it a good niche, but it's also not the first thing I'm thinking to build a comp around because it's not going to provide, an output of a special that is going to be as game-changing as any of these will. Same kind of reason that I put 52 down here. This one's down here primarily because it's not getting something higher value like missiles or a Booyah Bomb. The Killer Whale will help it win a fight here or there. And, that's great, but with a special, that's not necessarily going to win you a team fight in the way that missiles or a Booyah Bomb can. So, a little bit lower impact there, and you're relying more on the main weapon to do more work, which is, again, like what we talked about with the 52 gal, but it's a little bit weaker of a weapon than the 52 gal combined with the wall is. It can't take fights quite as well. It needs to skirmish. It needs to get the opponents to pay attention to it. And I think at higher levels of skill, it's very difficult for a brush to do things because it can kind of just get shut down if it gets even the slightest bit too aggressive, especially with so few flank routes on the map. Give this weapon more flank routes, it could move up a little bit maybe. But right now, with the choke points the way they are, it kind of just has to be a gesture in the corner, and sometimes you can just ignore it. Usable, but probably outclassed. These are weapons where, it's if you want to use them, you can make this work, but you're going to need to build your comp around it, around making it work. It's a little bit more of a selfish choice on a comp, because as soon as you pick any one of these things, now the rest of your teammates have to compensate for what your weapon doesn't have. And that's something that, I've been running into a lot on my teams that I've been playing with, my pickups and stuff, is that I love running Blaster and want to run more Blaster. But it seems like every time I try to pick Blaster, everyone's like, oh, okay, wait, we've got a Blaster now. So we need more paint, and we can't run our junior player that we were planning on running, which means we're going to get fewer bubbles. And so the weapon itself in a vacuum is fine. The problem is often more the impact that it's going to have on the rest of the team in shoring up for its weaknesses, because it definitely has weaknesses, and the team needs to know how to play around those in order to be impactful. So we'll start with the Hydra. The Hydra is an absolute massive machine of a weapon, and it also has these really nasty downsides to it. It's very polarized. On one hand, when this weapon has charge, it can win a 1v3 against the enemy team, straight up. If they don't play around it very carefully, it's not like an E-liter where one of them is going to die, all of them are going to die. Because this thing has so much DPS, and that charge lasts for so long if it's charged up. And it has almost the same range as the E-liter. So, in certain situations, the Hydra beats everything in the game. The problem is you have to set those situations up, and doing so is a huge pain in the butt. This thing is so slow moving, because it's a heavyweight weapon. It's also very slow to be able to start firing, so there are very few positions it's able to take where it will be in range, but also will not get aggressed on before it can start firing and be forced to move. It's also countered really hard by some of the best and most sought-after specials in the game right now, namely Booyah Bomb and Missiles, and to an extent Zuka. Any of those things come up against the Hydra, and they just bully it so that it can never have the impact that it is capable of having on the match. So as soon as a Hydra does anything, it's probably going to be getting a triple kill. But it's going to get those so infrequently and so unreliably that you probably can't depend on it in the same way that you can depend on an E-liter or an Explo to have an impact. Another problem the Explo faces that the Hydra faces is the Explo. The Explo is actually a pretty good counter to this weapon because, like the E-liter, the Hydra is a line of sight weapon. It needs to be able to see things to hit them, and the Explosher doesn't need to see things to hit them. Whenever I was playing with Devi, the weapons that she would complain about the most by far, and the ones she would draw our attention to when they were on the enemy comp is, oh, they have a Slosher, oh, they have a Blaster, weapons that hit up over ledges. And the Explo can do exactly that, to force the Hydra to lose its charge in order to survive that encounter and get away. And the fact that, it has that concrete and solid a counter, just throw things at it, make it move, throw bombs, use specials on it, things like that, that makes it more counterable than something like the E-liter or the Explo are. So that's why I put it down here. I think Splatlings are generally not in a great place right now because of the relative strength of E-liter and the relative strength of Explo. And that's why all of them end up in this tier. The Hydra, the Ballpoint, and the Heavy are all solid choices for Splatling players. If, the maps ever change, if this factor of the game that these wide open sight lines are a little bit more closed off or there are more flank options, I think Splatlings have a pretty solid set of kits, honestly, between these three. And they're not exactly hurting for good kits. Hydra is probably the strongest of the three right now, but all three are usable, and depending on what you want, you could definitely just rotate between them. But I think they're really held down right now by the state of the meta. So Ballpoint is a really odd one because its kit really doesn't seem to synergize well with it, but actually Inkjet's not the worst for it at all. Anytime that it wants to go aggressive, it actually can. Its mini shots make it a little bit easier to walk forward with this thing and play it more midline-ish. And if you do get it up in a really aggressive position, that inkjet can actually be a really good counter to an enemy backline player that's not ready for it. So we saw that used a little bit, the vanilla ballpoint kit in Splatoon 2 towards the end of the game as a counter to ray spam weapons, because you would just use the inkjet to take out the ray player instead of trying to ray it back yourself. So it's a little bit niche, it's a little bit weird, but the ballpoint is such a strong main weapon that it doesn't really matter that much if it's got weird stuff for it. The fizzies are also a little bit annoying with it because you have to choose between using the main weapon or using the fizzy bombs. You really can't go back and forth between both cleanly, because the main weapon, you need to be continually resetting your charge on it. And so you're never really going to be wanting to hold down R and mash the buttons and like move around with the thing to get your soda can exploding. Tri-Stringer is one of the biggest surprises, I think, of the game for me individually. I thought this thing was trash when it first debuted, but the way that people started using it was completely different than I was expecting them to. I was thinking this was going to be a charger. This is not a charger. If you want a charger, you run this or you run this. This is more of like a Rapid Blaster Explo kind of deal. You use the arrow's explosions on the ground to deal chip damage with this thing. You just aim around your opponent and deny them space. I think there are better options for that. I think the Rapid is a better option. I think the Sloshing Machine is a better option. I think the Explo is a better option for that kind of play style, which is why I put it down here. But it's definitely something that can work at denying the opponent's space and dealing chip damage to them for staying in those spaces. I think its charge time is too slow to compete with all those other weapons, and it's still, really lacking in the ability to splat someone quickly, which can be important sometimes, especially if you're getting rushed. If this weapon gets rushed, it's in a lot of trouble. But as long as it stays back and plays relatively safe, it can still have a pretty decent impact as such. Let's rearrange things a little bit here, because I do actually have an order for this. And that's probably good. Okay. Tetras. Tetras are, when played well, they're up here-ish. The problem is, in order to be played well, your team needs someone to paint for them. Your team needs someone to go in with them. Your team needs to, watch everything that they're doing and play off everything they're doing. And it's one of the most selfish weapons in the entire game. It's very, very dependent on its team to follow up in exactly the way that it needs. It probably needs something like a junior, just like full-time painting for it. But if the Tetra Dualies are unlocked and the player is one-tricking them, is just mechanically a god, these weapons seem unkillable sometimes. The ability of these weapons to create advantageous fights for them is second to almost none. It's very, very difficult to fight them when they're playing well. And they're going to run quick respawn and just go in and feed and not care as much about dying. So they're going to take more fights, and they're going to be really aggressive. They're going to be a pain in the butt. They're going to push your team back. And their player is also going to get better at fighting because they're going to be fighting so often. So very, very hard weapon to contest. Now, there are some counters to this thing. One of them is paint, like we talked about. Another one is, if you're able to abuse its kill time, this thing actually is relatively slow. As a splatter shot, my goal when I'm fighting Tetras is literally get on top of them, out DPS them. I do not care that much about them, dodge rolling around, as long as I'm still in range to hit them. They really have to use the range for that. The other thing about Tetras, though, that I think really sinks them a little bit lower is that I said they were selfish, and that's not just because they need paint and support. They also don't bring much to the table in the way of their special. Their special doesn't... It's at most going to, maybe keep them alive or help them engage once. And the best case scenario is that you use it into a group of enemy players that don't have anywhere to go, and you get a pick or two from it, which is nice. It's better than Splashdown by a lot. But one of the problems with Reef Slider is that as soon as you use it, if you end it in line of sight of an E-leader, they can just snipe you before you can do anything about it, and it's frighteningly easy for them to do. So they are held back a lot in their ability to use that special by what is in the metagame right now. Their Autobomb is actually phenomenal for it because it lets them scout. It lets them know exactly where enemy players are before they have to engage them. And that's the same kind of deal for the Blaster. Blaster loves its Autobomb because it wants to know what's going on around it so that it knows what to shoot at. But yeah, the special, it's not doing an awful lot for the rest of the team. And so as soon as you run into something like missiles, where it's helping you win your fight and also helping the rest of the team by suppressing the backliner, the Reef Slider is just completely outclassed. And so you're running this for the main weapon, for the ability of your one player who plays Tetras to be able to absolutely pop off with it and get a whole bunch of kills, because that's the only value that you're going to get out of this weapon on a team comp. And so despite the fact that it can be more powerful, few teams are willing to run it because it would take so much away from the rest of the team. So that's a really complicated case, and it's been like that since Splatoon 2. That's just kind of how that weapon has always been. Okay, Blaster. Same kinds of issues as the Tetra Dualies. It's not quite as good of a main weapon, but it's close, and it has a better special for supporting the team. Granted, it's usually going to use it more selfishly, and it has the Autobomb. And its big issue is just that it does not paint to save its life, and also that its Big Bubbler is much more difficult to use in the way that you want to use it, like a junior would use it. Its Big Bubbler is often used more to save itself. It's often used if you're on a push, if you're on a flank, and things are starting to get hairy, they're starting to close in on you. Popping the Big Bubbler can kind of turn that around, force the enemy team to move back, and give your team a little more space to work with. But it's not the optimal use for playing the objective of the Big Bubbler. So that's far from ideal that you're kind of, again, playing a relatively selfish weapon. And it can slay, it can pop off, it can be, you know, getting multi-kills and getting value that way. But weapons that have to get kills with the main weapon, with a player's mechanical skill, those are a little bit on the weaker side than weapons that kind of do a lot of the work for you. Squiffer is higher than I think a lot of people would place it, but I think it still has pretty much the same niche that it had in Splatoon 2, which was on a lot of maps, like, it's kind of nice to have this midline weapon that can just really quickly one-shot. I think Squiffer is... the short-range chargers are just generally not doing as well right now, in part because it's hard to see them coming, and there are only so many like sight lines that they can use without getting shot by an E-leader as well. They can't like take a different really good sight line for them that the E-leader doesn't see. But the Squiffer is the best of the bunch right now. Part of that is because its gimmick is just better. It is able to charge at the same speed when it makes jump shots, which is different from the Goo Tuber, and of course the Bamboozler is not going to one-shot, so doesn't have quite the same impact. You take that thing, the Squiffer, to, say, Inkblot, and you can hit up on top of that plat, and that's really, really dangerous, and it paints a lot too. That's something that Ice has been using it for recently. And it also has Big Bubbler, which the weapon itself doesn't get a ton out of using that selfishly, but it's, you know, it's going to be playing a positioning where it's not going to hurt it too much to like go onto the tower and pop the Big Bubbler where it needs to go. So I don't think it's hurting too much for it. A place I could see this being really good is on like Hagglefish. You push out in front of the zone and you're trying to lock from underneath their hut, and like you hop up and you can take shots at their plat as they're trying to drop down. So that sort of thing I could see being really powerful with it. And there are other situations like that that I think Squiffers can find. So I think this is solid. Like if you want to run a short range charger, go for it. But if you're running charger, you probably want to be running one of the long range ones, and that's why it's down where it is. Heavy, we've mostly talked about. Wave Breaker's solid, but again, it has the problem that how does it put the Wave Breaker in a location that's useful without completely compromising its safety? It's a long-ranged weapon. It wants to stay at long range. It's hard for it to get that anywhere. It also has the problem that it's going to get countered by an E-liter or even a charger in terms of range and also kill time. And so it's really hard for it to exist on the map. And they just never want to give the heavy a good sub-weapon. So it's definitely the weakest of the three, in my opinion. But I think it's still usable. It's just like... it might be a level down. I don't know. It's got like... it's got a decent special for it. So if you want a Wave Breaker, it's an option. This would be like... I feel like it's like an A+. It's like in between these two tiers. But do I want to make another tier? I might actually just move these down to another tier here. I think that's what I'm going to do. I've decided. We're adding a row. Okay. And we're just going to do this, 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 and... honestly, I think this is actually up here. So we'll talk about L3 next. So L3 paints about as much as the Neo Splash, has longer range, and gets the same special. The issue is that it doesn't have a sub-weapon that synergizes with it as well. So if you want a crab tank, your answer is probably the Splash-o-matic, but I wouldn't write this off as much as some people have. I think that MPU is not as big of a deal for it as it was in Splatoon, as people thought it was in Splatoon 2. I think you're still very likely to just end up needing a second shot anyway, even if you have the MPU buff. So I think that this is still a playable weapon. Just because there's another option for Crab Tank that plays its role really well, and because this thing gets outranged in a couple of annoying matchups, like Dualie Squelchers are really hard for it, like Rapid is really hard for it, having to deal with an Explo is pretty hard for it. All of those things can really harass it pretty well and keep it out. So it's like near the bottom here of meh tier, where we're starting to be in the range of weapons where I'm like, I don't know how well this works. But I think you could put this on a competitive team, and I'd be like, yeah, I can see it. Wouldn't be my first choice, but I think you could do it. So then moving down, Heavy, like I was talking about, doesn't have a whole lot. Thank you so much for the raid, Etherizer. Appreciate you. Doing L3, what a coincidence. Welcome. Trying to hit a curling bob. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Because, like, Crab is a great special, great support special, great attacking special, does a lot of things. And this one gets it pretty fast. That automatically makes it a pretty solid weapon. You can't knock that aspect of it. The problem is that there's an even more solid weapon that already does all of those things, too. So it's outclassed for sure. Heavy, again, I'd probably rather have a Ballpoint or a Hydra, but can absolutely be played, and Wave Breaker's not bad. 96. The big issue with 96 is Inkvac. It's really good if Inkvac is good, but Inkvac is not that good. It is definitely something you can play around. It has a lot of counters that are pretty glaring. And so it can have a high impact, and if you want to have a lot of Inkvacs, that's probably the call that you're looking for. Like, you could go Jet and get it slightly faster, but the main weapon would be much less useful because it's only there to paint for the Inkvac. It's not really there to engage in fights very effectively. So I would definitely, I think, prefer to have a 96, and that's why I've got the Jet down as far as it is, as well as its sub. But Inkvac needs to be better for this weapon to be as good, and also the RNG is just really painful with as low of a fire rate as it has. If you're picking it for fighting, like 52 or Squeezer are also right there, and they're looking at you, and they have good specials, and like you're picking this for the Inkvac if you're picking it, IMO. And if you're picking something for the Inkvac, why not pick Charger, right? So there are definitely other options to look at for any of the reasons that I could think of to run a 96, but in the case that you really want an Inkvac, and in the case that you want to run an E-liter instead of a Charger, you know, there's a use case. And that's about as much as I can say, I guess. Octobrush, I think Zipcaster is a really weak special. It's very high skill ceiling, though. And so I'm willing to be proven wrong as time goes on and people figure out the Zipcaster more. Because there are some things that Zipcaster does that no other special can do as well. There are positions it can threaten because it gets to ignore level geometry. And so it does have more of a niche in the way the game currently is, where there aren't a lot of ways in, and Zipcaster is the only way that you have ways in. So I'm leaving this here for now. This could go up. This could have a niche that no other weapon fills, because none of the weapons above it currently have Zipcaster, and this is arguably the best Zipcaster weapon in the game right now. Rapid is just generally a pretty good main weapon with a pretty good special. It's like not offensive, but it also doesn't do anything that especially well. There are... I don't know why it's picking a Tenta Brella for me, but... because I've got the Splattershot equipped, but it's just showing me Tenta Brella, even though that's not highlighted on screen. I don't know what I did, but this is funny. Anyway, so Tri-Strike, you don't have that many options for it, and one of them is the Slosher, which is probably better than this weapon. But the main weapon here, if you want the long-range poke, does get you Tri-Strike, also gets you an Ink Mine. So there's a lot here that it's like, I don't know why you would want this over other things, but like, it kind of works. You can use it. I just don't know why you would want to use it over other stuff. Like, I could see it being put into a competitive team comp. I just don't see it being like outstanding on any competitive team comp. The next tier down, I might actually drop this down to like here, because this actually really describes that, I think. If you want to make it work, you can, but I don't know why you would, is basically my thought on Rapid right now. Like, Rapid Pro, the little bit of extra range helps a lot. Inkvac is, like, probably best on a weapon like this, I would think. I don't know. It's mostly for the extra range. But then, and a more usable sub-weapon, I would say. Not that either of them are doing great in that department. Roller. Roller is another very selfish weapon, and it's even more, like, in this game, because of, you know, it not being the strongest main weapon against experienced competitive players, these two are going to get more kills, I think, against, like, top-level players than this thing will. This thing is something that punishes you if you mess up, if you don't check a corner, if you don't paint an area where someone might be sharking. But as soon as you like know where the roller is, a top-level team can definitely counter that a lot better than they can counter something like Tetra's. I think this is a weaker version of these two's problem, which is it's very selfish. If you're putting that on a team comp, you need to build the entire team comp around it, and that's aggravating for the rest of the team because they have to pick all of their high paint weapons and they can't pick, you know, what they necessarily want all the time. Gloogas. Gloogas have the best kit they could possibly ask for, and I think the main weapon is still just holding them back a little too much. I think the fire rate is too low, so it gets too little ink, and also is too aim-intensive. The wall helps it a lot with the aim-intensiveness problem, so it kind of functions a little bit like a 96, or like it's actually exactly the same kit as the 52 gal, and it can kind of be a discount sort of 52 gal. The problem is the 52 gal is ruthlessly consistent, and the Gloogas are not. To get their 2-shot, they need to dodge roll. If they don't dodge roll, then they need to 3-shot, which is a significantly slower kill time and also much less consistent because you have to fire in dual reticle mode. So it needs to set its own fights up for it very carefully. It needs to have paint that's not going to come from the main weapon itself. It's just got like a little bit too weak of a main weapon, even for such a baller of a kit that it's got. Tri-Slosher, it's absolutely something that can work. I've seen it work. Shinex's team in Big House made this weapon work on Undertow. There are places where Inkjet is really good, and I think, you know, Inkjet might, if it gets put on other weapons, suddenly jump up a little bit in people's estimation because of its ability to attack backliners with reliable one-shots that are a little bit difficult to predict. There are a lot of ledges you can hide under in this game. It's just right now we don't have a way of doing anything with them besides like using a slosher or a blaster or something like that. An inkjet would be another option, and just needs, you know, the right weapon kit. One of the big problems that it has right now is that it doesn't have the burst bomb that it used to have, which made it a lot more powerful in one-on-one fights and also for mobility. It's harder for this thing to move and get into position. And in a game where everyone's already expecting you to be running Ninja Squid and is already going to be checking corners and is already going to be, you know, throwing point sensors at you and stuff, its job, which is to get into position where it can reliably win the fight, because it can reliably win a fight if it gets on top of you, but its job getting in there, that's always been the hard part with Tri-Slosher, and it's harder now than it ever has been, because the maps just don't allow that many flank routes. So it's definitely playable, and, you know, with new patches, maybe new maps, things like that, I could see it being playable again. But in competitive play, you're probably not going to see it very much. It's going to be like a very niche pick if you're running it at all, and it's probably someone who could play one of these or one of these if the situation called for it. Stamper. Again, Stamper is new, and so I reserve the right to bump it up if new stuff is discovered or people start pushing it further. But right now, I think Stamper is very difficult to play around. It gets rushed down really, really hard. It does not have a fast kill time, so it really, really relies on hitting its damage combos from far away. And it's got very slow-moving projectiles. Its burst bomb is a faster damage option than its other hitbox. The light hitbox is faster. I'd have to test that out, but let me check that really quickly. It's almost the same. It's not as easy to miss the light attack, but the charge attack, oh my goodness, this thing is slow. Like, it goes really far, but it should just miss because you can see it coming and dodge it left or right. You really have to lead your shots so far that it's kind of tough to hit that. And Zipcaster is, like, usable on it for sure. It's not a bad Zipcaster weapon because it has the one-shot potential, and it also has some range in case people back up away from it. So, like, it's up there with the Octobrush in terms of being able to use the Zipcaster well. This one I could see moving up, but right now this is about where I feel like it's at. It doesn't paint super well either. That's something that I think is a big problem of trying to fit it into a comp. Mini is so close to being such a good weapon, it just needs to not have the literal worst special in the game. Like, this could easily jump up into, like, this tier right here if you just gave it a special that functions. But right now, the only thing it's going to be able to do with its hammer is throw it like it's a Trizuka that you only get one shot of. You try and hammer with this, and you're taking the weapon out of its optimal positioning in order to use a special that has a broken hitbox and try to engage at melee range, which is just never advantageous. So I recommend if you use this weapon, you farm for special really quickly, throw it, start farming for another special, and just keep going on that loop. The main weapon itself and the sub-weapon are phenomenal together. So much potential right here. This could jump very easily. It just needs slight tweaks to its kit. Bloblobber got a really weak kit. The main weapon is still solid. If you have it on zone, it's going to be very difficult to cap the zone, and that's about the most that I can say for it. It's a little bit too passive on the kit. It's not able to go and really make much more happen. It's just there to be like, well, I'll keep painting, I guess. But I think it is nice to have on the maps that are really easy to hold choke points for, because you just fill that with hitboxes. The problem is that this weapon already does that and has a useful special, so it outclasses it pretty hard. Dualies outclassed by Neo Splash in pretty much every regard. I think having the burst bomb is a better aggressive sub. The main weapon, I think, is just straight up better because it has the perfect accuracy without having to dodge roll. It can move around while shooting instead of just having to commit to dodge rolling in order to do that. And it's not going to commit itself to a position. Plus, it's lightweight. So I just usually rather have a splash than this. I don't see a use case for it because of the Splash-o-matic existing and doing pretty much the same thing but better. But If you really are a Dualies player, yeah, you can make it work. It can do pretty much the same things that a Splash does. Just like discount Splash-o-matic is basically what I'm seeing here. We've already talked about this a little bit, just like everything about it is meh. Everything about it has a slightly better version, but like they're all put together in a package that you can functionally use. It's usable. Luna Blaster, if you really want a Zipcaster, I would think you would go with this. If you want a blaster at short range that's going to go for like picks and sharks and stuff, I would think you're going to go for this. I don't see a use case for this one over those two things, but the combination of those two isn't terrible. It lets you hit up over cover, and since Zipcasters right now are trying to hit the front of cover and then attack over the top of them, that works well for it. But you can do the same thing with a brush. You can slosh up over the top of a wall with a brush, and it'll still do damage to people. So even for that niche, you know, this thing is going to paint more. This thing is going to have more mobility options. It's going to be less dependent on its team for that paint and that support so that it can get into position, because it can just put the brush down and move into that position on its own. I feel like it's outclassed, but like if you really want to go for it, it is an option for you. Everything above this point, I feel pretty comfortable saying like, yeah, that's fine. You can run that. You know, if you really want to make it happen, you can run any of those weapons in a competitive setting, and you won't just be like holding your team back. After we get past this point, though, I think all of these weapons are like, there is a better option at the very least. There are definitely some things that especially these weapons can do. I just don't think what these weapons do are worth as much as something else you could choose above. Carbon Roller, I don't know why you ever pick this over the Splat Roller. The Splat Roller one-shots, this one doesn't. Yeah, it has Zipcaster, and that's fun, but these are the better Zipcaster options for like being able to, you know, function alongside them. Because Carbon, basically all it has, I think, is the Zipcaster. It doesn't paint as well as this does. It's not going to one-shot, so it's not going to have the kill power that the Luna does. It kind of really needs to get the damage combos on, and it doesn't have a burst bomb to work with, so it's kind of just, it's got to hit people twice. And having to hit people twice with the roller is a huge nerf to the weapon class. Tenta Brella would be much, much higher if it worked, but it gets shot through the shield all too often. The shield bugs out and bounces off of things and goes flying up into the air. There's so much weird stuff that they need to fix about this weapon before it's going to be usable again. But it is definitely going to be the best of the Brellas when it does get fixed, if it ever gets fixed. I don't know if it's going to happen. Inkvac's not bad for it. It can kind of use that to protect itself when its wall is gone or whatever. And beacons are not a bad choice for it. Not the strongest kit it could have, but definitely one that's kind of fun because like you have one shield and then you have the vac and then you get another shield and you're just like, how in the world do I get through to this thing? But vac having the weaknesses that it has also is going to be an issue for it. I think there are going to be stronger kits for the Tenta Brella than this one. This Brella is underwhelming in a lot of ways. Its damage is inconsistent and slow. It's got the same problems that the Tenta Brella has, where people are shooting it through its shield. And it's going to paint decently well for a decent special that nobody's really prioritizing right now, but can be played. So it's very meh. It would probably be in this A+ tier if it worked. Dynamo Roller, I just have not seen like anybody running this. Everybody who like used to run Dynamo that I know of is running Flingza now. I can't tell you exactly why that is, although I don't think Tacticooler is a very strong special, and we'll see. I think like all of the Tacticooler weapons are down pretty far. My opinion on Tacticooler is that it is most of the time a liability to your team. I think it is actually more often than not something that you want to avoid picking up. I'll talk about a use case that I think is viable when I get to the Dapple Dualies, but it isn't saving the Dapple Dualies either. So the Dynamo effectively has a special that doesn't do very much to help you win a fight or anything. And it's very easy to force it to move with anything like a Fizzy Bomb, an Explo Shot, any of the specials that are being prioritized right now, like Tenta Missiles and Booyah Bombs. You can Zuka this thing pretty easily because you can hit it from outside its range. It's not doing too well, But one thing I will give it is that the Squid roll is actually a pretty beneficial movement option, and it's not going to get stuck as often as it would have if you were just porting the Splatoon 2 Dynamo over. I still think it's a very weak kit. I think a better kit could bump it up maybe to like meh or even usable, but probably outclassed. That's about where I see it being in its current state, with the state of the game being where it is. If you're a Dynamo one trick, I mean, you're going to play Dynamo anyway, and nothing I say is going to sway you. So, H3, I think Tacticooler is about the worst thing it could have gotten, because it's not going to want to use its own Tacticooler. It's going to want to stand back and just, like, apply slow zoning pressure. And a Tacticooler is useful if you're only if you're going to hold forward and go in. The 10% of comps that actually might be able to use a Tacticooler well are like short-range shooter comps that run at you and plan on just like using it like quick respawn, quick super jump, that kind of thing. And an H3 is absolutely not a part of that weapon comp, so it's really out of place for it. Same kind of problem with the Dynamo, really. But at least Dynamo can pretend to be an anchor in that sort of comp. Whereas the H3, nah, you kind of want that thing pushing up because you're going to want something longer range than it on the team comp too. So, yeah. Not in a good spot. Point sensor, honestly, not the worst thing for it to have. Because like we were talking about in the tournament earlier, I think point sensors were shutting me down a lot on aggressive plays I was trying to make. But this one... there are a lot better point sensor options, like maybe Explosher, perhaps. Anyway, Reef-Lux. It farms missiles. Unfortunately, that's all it does well. It's kind of... It's up there... The main weapon's a little bit more useful, I think, than an Aerospray, but not by much. I think that it's basically like... all that pseudo-Aerospray status where it's just there to farm the special, which isn't a useful enough thing to do. Like, even though it gets missiles, and it paints better than just about any other weapon in the game. I don't know the comparison between it and, like, an Aerospray or a Sploosh, but, like, if you want to spam a special and do nothing else, that's your weapon, and it's just not seeing the results. Like, people are going to Goo Tuber or Flingza before they're going to the Reef-Lux at a top level of competitive play to try and get their missile output. And I think a big part of that is also the curling bomb. Like, the curling bomb is completely useless for this weapon. There's nothing that it wants to do that a curling bomb does better than just about anything else in the game. I would probably rather have a line marker on the Reef-Lux than a curling bomb. And that's saying something, because that is a really weak sub-weapon right now. So that's my take on the Reef-Lux. I think it just doesn't do enough things. And the missile output that it's going to have that's slightly better than like a Flingza or a Goo Tuber does not outweigh the advantages that those main weapons have. And they're especially the sub-weapon of the Goo Tuber. Zap is probably the best cooler weapon right now. And I could see it maybe... Honestly, actually, wait a minute. No, this is definitely a tier up. This is... You can make it work if you really want to. And by... Because what I really meant a lot of the time from that tier is, like, this is a thing that, like, if you really want to play the main weapon, sure, go for it. But here it's more like, if you really want to play Tacticooler, sure, go for it. There are comps you can build around Tacticooler, but again, it's very comp dependent, and you're forcing your teammates to play a certain way around it, and it's still not that great. But if you want to play a Tacticooler weapon, it is still pretty good at painting. It is still going to be able to push in with it like it always was in Splatoon 2. It's got a bomb. It can do some stuff. Just... weakest that the NZAP has ever been in any Splatoon game for sure. Bamboo. I think that this is kind of... It's played a lot differently from Squiffer, so I might be oversimplifying this a little bit, but I think it's definitely the weakest of the short-range chargers. The Autobomb doesn't give it a lot in terms of like mobility or anything. It can help suss people out, which is nice. It can find them if they're sharking, but I just don't think it gets that much from its kit. And the main weapon itself probably wants at least a little something from its kit. Like, the Mark 1 in Splatoon 2 had missiles. I think that was the Mark 1. Missiles were really good for it. Missiles were a great special for it to have. This one has... It's just a little bit weaker version of missiles, kind of, sort of. It's like, Whale... It does, help you displace someone and help you start a fight by moving in on that by a little bit, but It's just like a weaker version of missiles. It's probably what missiles should be. And so everything about it is just like the tiniest bit underwhelming, and it adds up to a package that I don't think is going to do that much. I could see this bumping up a tier or two, because one thing that I am thinking is that, like, people really, really overrate, I think, the impact that MPU had for a weapon like this. A lot of the time, the bamboo's still two-shot. Like, it was not that reliable that you were going to get damage combos without really established set plays with your teammates. Because most of the time that your teammate shoots someone and then you hit them with a full charged bamboo shot, you don't need MPU to splat them for that. Like, a Splattershot bullet does 35. This thing still combos with a 35 damage shot. So there are so few cases where you actually needed the extra damage to be able to get a damage combo. And the only thing you were running the MPU for was the hope that the opponent gets stuck on enemy ink, and that damages them enough that you are able to one-shot them. And that's a pretty rare circumstance, I think. So I don't think that was really what made this weapon strong in the first place, as much as, you know, that's been what it's made out to be. So the main weapon itself is pretty strong, and that alone might be enough to get it up out of this tier. I'm thinking about, you know, the company that it's in. I think I am going to bump it up one. Now, where do I want to put it? I probably want to put it, like, hereabouts. Maybe hereabouts. It's in the good main weapon, not as good kit sort of company there. Because, yeah, looking at those weaknesses that I was talking about and the strengths that it has, I don't think it's in the same company as these weapons down here. I think it's actually better than those. Yeah, that's where I'm at on that. And then Splattershot Pro is... It's a little bit underwhelming as a main weapon. If it had better ink efficiency, it would be phenomenal. If it was a little bit faster of fire rate, it would be phenomenal. Like, it just needs the tiniest little buff, but it gets outclassed really hard by 52 and Squeezer, depending on how you want to use it. And Crab is great, but it's not going to get a lot of them because it has ink efficiency problems. It paints pretty well until it runs out of ink, and the problem is that it runs out of ink pretty quickly. So that's the big weakness of the Splattershot Pro, and that's why, you know, I think more than anything else, people overrated MPU on the K Pro. MPU K Pro in Splatoon 2 was just straight up worse than the K52 gal, but this is really, really held back by the fact that it does not have a bomb or a wall. It has a line marker, which I think is probably on the whole the weakest sub-weapon of the game. Well, let's talk about the problems with line marker. First of all, it does a pitiful amount of damage. Like, yes, it has E-liter range, but an E-liter doesn't have to hit 3 shots to kill someone. Actually, no, it doesn't have to hit 4 shots to kill someone. Or take up that much of your ink tank to fire one of those shots. And the marking effect is just straight up better done on a point sensor. If you're using it for the information, play a point sensor, because you will reliably be able to hit them and mark them. If you know exactly where they are with pinpoint accuracy enough to hit them with the line marker, then you don't need to mark them because you already know where they are. The point sensor actually checks a choke point for you. It makes it very difficult for an opponent to move anywhere and not get marked. You were seeing me in the tournament get marked from below a floor, like up on the ceiling. Point sensor got thrown and it marked me straight below it. Like, that sort of thing happens with point sensors. That will never happen with a line marker. You will never, like, accidentally reveal someone who you didn't at least know was in the vicinity with the line marker. So the damage isn't really worth running it for. It combos, I guess, with 2 shots, and then if they're running away, you tag them with line marker. But, like, if you're getting into a fight, you're probably committed to it, and that probably isn't going to come and be a factor very often. Plus, Burst Bomb is a lot more reliable for that sort of thing. Crab is fine, but it doesn't paint for a lot of crabs. This weapon paints for a lot of crabs. This weapon has a similar range and gets crab tank, and I think it's a better main weapon because it paints more. So I just don't see a reason to use this one. You can use it if you like it and you're waiting for another kit and you want to get used to it, for sure. But I think that you're going to find more value out of other options. And then the Jet Squelcher, how the mighty have fallen. All you need to do is put a top tier special on this weapon and you will break it again. But, especially if you put a burst bomb on it too. But right now, the thing that the Jet Squelcher did in Splatoon 2, that it can probably still do now, is it played as a paint support anchor, letting you run 3 aggressive weapons because you were getting enough paint behind you from the anchor itself. Because Chargers, they can paint, but they don't paint because they're more concerned with firing shots and cutting off enemy angles. They get more value out of denying the opponents access to the map than they do out of actually painting the map for them. They can apply zone control over the whole map instead of only applying paint control, which is what they're doing if they're painting. So they favor the zone control whenever it's important for them to have that. The Jet Squelcher, on the other hand, is just going to paint. And with that paint, it's going to trade the zone control for having special constantly, because this thing gets special really, really fast. The issue is that it's got a special that's not spammable from the back lines, because it wants to fire that special off from the back lines, stay on the back lines, and keep painting from the back lines. But the ink vac forces it to walk forward, and that's just not a thing that it wants to do, because like everything else in the game splats faster than this thing does. It's so slow at slaying. So as soon as anyone gets on top of it, it's got a problem. And yeah, it's got the ink vac, but you can flank the ink vac, you can paint up the ink vac and then shoot it before it fires its shot. It doesn't have quite as many ways out of bad situations. And again, it has line marker, which is just not doing anything for it. If you're at the range to hit someone with the angle shooter, you're usually at a range that you want to just be hitting them with the main weapon anyway. And it's also a straight line of sight weapon. So unlike the Explo, which benefits from having marked someone and being able to see them go behind a wall, once they're behind a wall, this thing can't shoot it anyway. So there's nothing that would be able to do with that information. So I would say these can do some things, but there are definitely better options for you to choose. And I would consider one of the alternatives that I've discussed if you're trying to build this into a competitive team comp. Okay, now we're down to EU tier. These weapons are not going to be seeing a lot of competitive play at all, probably ever. But there are some things that they do. Those things are just not as useful. So let's start with the Splatana Wiper, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who are, maybe new and haven't seen my thoughts on the Splatana Wiper. The Wiper does a couple of different things, which is interesting. It can play sort of like a discount Dualie Squelchers, in that it uses its relatively long range and its very fast strafe speed to kite people. The problem is that the damage it's doing while it kites someone is so slow, so minimal, that it's actually, I think, faster to hit indirects with the Clash Blaster, which is insane because this thing is so slow. Yeah, it's pretty good at keeping itself alive. Like, if you gave this thing, like, the sort of range and power that a 52 has while it's able to strafe around like that, okay, now we're talking about something. But it does not have anywhere near that sort of DPS. And so you don't have to be scared of it and its strafe speed. It'll run away from you, and you can just kind of let it, because, okay, cool, it did 30 damage, now I just run away before it can ever kill me, and I'm fine. Or, okay, it did 30 damage, that's not stopping me from just getting right on top of it and killing it. Getting right on top of it and killing it, oh, but Gem, you say, it can one-shot. But it can one-shot very slowly. I tested this out frame by frame, and I compared it to a Splat Roller. A Splat Roller splats in 0.45 seconds. A Splatana with the one-shot splats in 0.7 seconds. This kill time here, comparable to the Roller. Okay, so Roller is this. Splatana Wiper is this. Pretty similar. However, Roller one-shots from about here. Whereas Splatana Wiper, in order to one-shot from here, needs to dash. And that dash adds basically double the kill time. So that's the difference there. That's why the kill time, I consider it to be so much slower from that range that it has. If you're trying to do roller things, pick a roller. If you're trying to do Dualie Squelchers things, pick a Dualie Squelchers. I do not see a reason to pick this weird hybrid of the two, which can do both, but both worse. Because you're only going to be able to do one of those things at a time in the middle of a game. So, like, maybe for one set play, you can be an assassin, and then for one set play, you can just be, like, a Dualie Squelchers kiting people. But, like, you're never going to be able to take advantage of using both of those at the same time, I don't think. Like, switching between the two doesn't seem consistent against someone who's going to aim well and is not going to let you just back up. So, I don't see a use case for this. Another really, really painful thing for this weapon, besides the main weapon, which I think by itself is enough to put it down here, to be clear, is that it has the worst special in the game. Which is a real pity, because the torpedo actually gives it a lot of really interesting damage combos that help with its kill time. They don't fix its kill time, but they help it. It can poke from a distance. It could get chip damage. It can play kind of like a tri-stringer sometimes, in that it just throws torpedoes and does damage from a distance and doesn't actually try to get really quick kills. All of the paint that it's putting down with those torpedoes is going towards getting it an ultra stamp. This is not helping. And I'm worried that on future kits, they won't give it a sub-weapon that it can combo with, and now its kill times are even worse because it has even fewer combo options. I think the next kit that it has, it needs to have a burst bomb. It really needs to have a burst bomb to be able to combo with some of its damage and start putting some interesting ideas together, on top of having a better special. If it has that, then maybe we could see it getting some use, but I think this weapon is just not going to be seen in competitive play very much. Clash Blaster DPS is just such a huge problem for this. It does not paint very well at all, and it does not splat someone very fast at all. Its indirect damage is what people at like lower levels of play hate about it. This weapon. This right here is the really slow kill time I've been talking about. Oops. The double direct we'll talk about in a second, because that is an option. But at low levels, you know, look at how far away you can aim from someone and still hit them. This is kind of nuts that I can miss this badly and still hit my shots. And at a low level of play, people are going to be able to take advantage of that, because opponents will not have their aim on as quickly as you can do damage with this sort of aim in their general direction play style. Like, I'm just like wave aiming all over the place, and I'm still going to get that guy. I'm just like... So there is a very consistent kill time that you are able to establish with this that falls off hard as soon as somebody learns how to do this. Or somebody learns how to do this. Or somebody learns how to do this. All of those things beat Clash Blaster really hard. And there are so many weapons that have that kind of a kill time. Now, your best option with this is to go for double directs, which is a faster kill time. Why would you want that kill time, though, when you only need to hit single directs from a longer range with a weapon that paints even more? And then, mind you, this weapon doesn't paint that much. Clash Blaster's paint is abysmal. So, this is the best kit in the entire game, arguably. And it does not matter, because the main weapon is just not going to get a lot of use out of it. I guess you can, like, try to combo off of the 30. Like, there aren't even that great of damage combos off of the bomb. You got Trizooka. But literally why, when Splattershot has it, and will farm it faster, and also has almost the same kit, and can paint for itself, and get out of tricky situations faster, and has the most insane discrepancy in kill time. This is a weapon that I think we will never see in competitive play. Not at least unless someone's memeing. So the fact that it has the kit that it has is the only reason that I am putting it above bottom tier and putting it up here, because Splat Bomb and Inkzuka is a very functional kit. Just the main weapon cannot support those things very well at all. Dapple Dualies. Dapple Dualies are extremely short range, and that is the biggest problem that they have as a weapon. And unfortunately, this kit for the Dapple Dualies does nothing to support that problem. The Dapples have a beacon, and they have a Tacticooler. None of those things does anything to a midline weapon that is looking at you. Even like a mediocre midline weapon can just like look at you, see that you're there, and you are probably dead. So you have to be very, very sneaky. And there are other weapons that rely on stealth too. Like you saw me using a lot of stealth plays on the Splattershot. The 52 will make a lot of stealth plays. The blasters. But all of them have longer range still, and all of them except maybe the blasters paint better. Because this thing, it has such short range that its paint is bad. Which is crazy. Like, you have to punch someone with this thing. Also, the rolls don't go very far for some reason. So, like, it's not even the easiest thing to make someone miss, because there's only so far of a radius around where you're currently standing that you can be in the next couple of seconds before you get stuck in a dodge roll. If they gave this a burst bomb, now it's interesting. Tacticooler is not the worst special for it to have. Like I've said, I think Tacticooler is definitely not the strongest option right now, but it is a weapon that can use the Tacticooler buff, because you can get the Tacticooler buff, jump into your beacons with it, and be back really quickly. Generally, the only time that I see that being super useful is on solo plays, on solo flanks. Like, so what I was doing with this thing was I was trying to be a rat in the enemy base, basically. I was trying to put beacons down so that I could jump back into them with the Tacticooler jump that I popped, which would enable me to get a flank off, die in the flank in all likelihood, because I'm flanking into like 1 or 2 or 3 enemy teammates, but I probably get a trade or something in the meantime, and then I make good on that trade by being able to Tacticooler jump into a beacon in the enemy base and do it again. And that sort of a play is a thing. Is it a good thing, especially against a competitive team? No. They're going to spot the beacons, they're going to either see your jump as you come in and then kite you, or they're just going to bomb your jump, and they're going to keep their base painted. They're not going to get caught off guard by flanks like that. So this definitely falls off very hard. But if you want your team to be doing that, that is kind of a lulzy thing that you can do that is a play style. It's a very similar deal to the Splash-o-matic here, where the Sploosh is going to try and live in your base. It's going to try and use its curling bombs to really quickly slip by you before you see it, and sneak up behind you, and just paint up behind you before you see it even coming. And that's about all it can do, because it doesn't have a bomb to poke with like it had in the Splash-o-matic 7 kit in Splatoon 2, which was the kit that was top tier in Rainmaker. This weapon is basically the same exact problem that the vanilla Sploosh had in Splatoon 2, where it has a curling bomb, which gives it no poke from distance. Sploosh got the weakest special in the game and no way to attack from range, which is kind of the same problem that the Dapples have to some degree. So all they can do is flank and hope that they don't get seen on a flank. And at a high enough level, people see those flanks and they don't work. So it has a play style, it's just not a good one. Then we come down to the weapons where it's like, okay, the ones above, I know what they're trying to do, it's just not good. Like, I know what things you can do with the Splatana Wiper. The kit is good on the Clash Blaster, that's usable. The Dapples, you can, play that silly play style. The Sploosh, you can play that silly play style. We're at the point where I legitimately don't know what these weapons are supposed to do. The Aerospray, the one thing it is good at doing is painting and getting special really fast. It doesn't have a special that's worth painting for, unlike what it had in previous kits. You couldn't farm the ballers, you couldn't farm, the Booyah bombs. It doesn't get like armor or missiles or anything like that. It gets Reef Slider. Reef Slider is a special that is for hard committing to a fight. It is for like pushing into the enemy team. That is the last thing that an Aerospray wants to do. On top of that, like, it gets Fizzy Bombs, which is great, but that's the only zoning pressure it has. It unlike the Sloshing Machine, the top tier Fizzy Bomb user, it doesn't have any damage combos that it can use off of those Fizzy Bombs. It's just throwing fizzies. It needs its teammates to follow up on that if it's going to do anything with them. So it's not going to have kill threat as often as other weapons that have fizzies will have it. And it doesn't have any long-range poking option besides that. So it's just like, here, have a fizzy. You're damaged, but now you're just going to heal it up and you're not going to die unless somebody else on my team does something, in which case it was a 2v1 and we should win it anyway, regardless of what weapon I'm using. There's just not a lot that weapon can do effectively. I guess maybe the idea with Turf War is that it paints a lot and then uses the Reef Slider to run away from fights. Maybe that's the play. Outside of that, I can't see a use case. I can't see a reason that I would want to pick an Aerospray even over the top of like other top tier weapons that do the same thing but better anyway. So yeah, very, very weak weapon. And then Undercover Brella, I've talked about so many times on the channel before, and the opinion has not changed there. It has a kit that seems like it wants a main weapon that kind of wants to frontline, except it's weak at that. It has a sub that does not want it frontlining because ink mines, at most, they're a trap that you lay for someone who's chasing you too hard, and you don't want to chase the Brella exactly. It's not that important to even remove from play. You want to fight its teammates, if at all possible. That's kind of how you play against any Brella. You fight against somebody other than the Brella, unless the Brella is alone and actually doing something really important. And so the Reef Slider on top of it, it's like, yeah, I guess it can get its shield up after the Reef Slider is done, and then the shield probably gets shredded by a single E-liter shot, and now you're out in the open with the weakest main weapon in the entire game that doesn't have a shield anymore. It's not that useful. For what it does, you would rather have something like a Splat Brella, which would be better if the netcode were okay. I guess the shield does come up a little quicker, so you're less likely to get shot through your shield with this weapon. So I guess that's an idea if you're really dead set on playing a Brella. There are other skirmishers that can do the same thing as this, but immensely better. 52 gal. Longer range, faster kill time, stronger shield, one that allows you to move around it and be unpredictable around it with its sub-weapon, with its splash wall. The 52 gal, I believe, also paints better and gets a special that's more useful to it. If a player on my competitive team were interested in picking up one of these two weapons, I would look at them like, why? Are you memeing right now? Like, this can't be serious. The other ones, I look at them and I'm like, I can see what you're trying to go for. I disagree, and I think we are going to find that it is not going to work for us, but we can find that out the hard way if you'd like. The other two, I'm like, why are we even wasting our time trying to find this out the hard way? This is not going to happen. That is my current thought on the state of the game balance in Splatoon 3, which I think is pretty darn good. Like, I think anything in this tier up here is something that you could totally run in tournaments at up to a pretty high level and have pretty good success on. I think these weapons, doing so would be surprising to see in tournaments, because you'd be like, I don't know why they're doing that, but I mean, it can work. It's really only these ones that are kind of the stinkers that I'm like, I don't see a use case at all. I don't see what mindset someone would want to be in that they would want to run those. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. For those of you who don't know, I'm doing this content thing full time. So here are the links to all of the things that I'm doing. I've got a Patreon if you want to support me. I've got a Medify account if you want private coaching. I sit people down and do VOD reviews with them. There's my Twitter, my Twitch, my TikTok, my YouTube, my Discord server, where we have a whole bunch of resources and a lot of people who would be happy to help you learn the game more if you're interested in that. So check out some of that sometime, somewhere, and that'll be neat and fun and groovy. See you, everybody. Thanks for watching.